Good morning, Senators. May I share my screen? I'm in downtown Seattle. A little bit of a backstory. I share this role with Alex Sheehan. Alex used to be a corrections officer who brought people to our homes. Frank, my husband, and I started Kate's House Foundation in 2015 because my background is a doctorate in pharmacology from University of Washington Medical School. And I did some of the early research on how naloxone can block opioids. And because of lived experience with a family member, we got together, used our retirement funds, and started buying homes where we could house people in a setting where they could get medication for SUD. And also we set up a rule that we wanted to be compassionate housing. So if somebody failed, they weren't going out the door, they were going to a family member, they were going to treatment. But we were not going to let them go. And 7 years later, we had housed probably 1,000 people. We work with King County Drug Court for half of our housing, so that's case managed. And we've been working with Department of Corrections exclusively from 2016, still to this day. Everybody we've housed has had a felony or a charge related to drug use and criminal justice. And following that, my committee was comprised of about 50 people with 25 frequent players. We were very interested in making sure we had subject matter experts. And every part of our committee's work was brainstorming. And these were some of the things we thought about. What services support people in recovery? And as we brainstormed, we brought people who are experts in that area, particularly people with lived experience and people who work with people with substance use disorder to inform our discussions. We realized right off something that we suspected, but housing is a primary need, and how do we increase access to housing? And that's not just the people that Kate's House Foundation houses, which are typically people coming in through the courts, but people who are still in addiction who deserve shelter. We determined that the LGBTQIA plus supportive housing was a significant need because there's a safety issue. We want people to feel safe in housing. And when we talked to people from the community, they said that was huge. Sometimes people would prefer to sleep on the streets rather than go to shared recovery housing. And where is the medical support for substance use disorder related conditions? My colleague just spoke about that. How do we get people into treatment quickly? And how does one access jobs and employment training? Children may be out of the home. And we want to give support for the foster parents and kinship parents, including Narcan access for CPS social workers. So CPS social workers could train foster parents on how to look for the signs with the young people that their foster parents are housing. And we determined peer support is key. How do we provide access to peer support? And how does someone easily find a recovery bed? And this informed all the recommendations that we made. And we know there's a lot of people who have experience with family. We know 50 to 70% of people know or care about somebody who has substance use disorder or a mental health condition that they need housing and they need support. And so what our proposals came to is, can we provide affordable housing either through tax incentives or incentives to landlords? Because as we know, we have a housing crisis in Washington State, particularly in King County. How do we get landlords to rent to those of us who want to provide housing and support? And one of the key things we do know from personal experience is to be allowed to have a shared recovery house in a neighborhood, we have to have zoning to allow that. And all of our homes are in South Seattle. We're comfortably allowed to have 8 unrelated people in a home. But how can we inform that throughout the state? And the ability to rent a house from a landlord to be used for a recovery home, we have to get rid of the stigma of substance use disorder, the stigma that neighbors will not be happy to have a recovery home in their neighborhood. We know right now that the payment vouchers for people who have no funding through Department of Corrections and through the Washington Alliance of Quality Recovery Residences is $700 a bed per month for 3 to 6 months. But we also know sometimes that's not enough time for people who have had so much loss in their lives to build their life again. And we want to provide access to the tools and education to provide quality services and support and housing for people who are not abstinent. We know that in our own housing experience, we expect people to relapse. But where do they go? We know where we provide housing and where we send people, but there needs to be some place where people who have failed can get treatment easily. So these are our homes. I wanted to show you a picture of 3 of our homes. They're just normal middle-class homes in safe neighborhoods where we're accepted by the neighbors. And these are some of our people. We take people from all walks of life, particularly from the justice system. But here's the fine print. We want to create a legislative policy to provide a property tax break for landlords. We want to implement LGBTQIA plus inclusive housing policy through state-funded training for housing providers. People who care want to help, but they need to be trained. We want to provide a capital budget and operating fund for people at every end. So, that includes behavioral health action plan, permanent supportive housing. And we've worked with other housing groups to determine how do we overlap and how do we engage. And education and employment, how do we provide education and employment for people who have no credit, no finances? They only have, perhaps if they're lucky, 3 to 6 months of housing payments. How do we, as people who care and housing providers, get them on their feet? One of the things we talked about was zoning and siting for all of these type of facilities: inpatient, outpatient, recovery residences, harm reduction sites, opioid treatment services. And we want to define really what a recovery residence is, what it provides, both for licensing and zoning purposes. I'm also a founding member of the Washington Alliance of Quality Recovery Residents, and still sit on the board where we provide standards to make sure our people that we house are in safe, homogeneous housing. We want to create more funding for the recovery readiness asset tool that's been built so that people can call and get a bed and call and get help. What we want to do is get rid of the barriers that really are killing people. We see it too. When we started in the business, we saw meth and heroin. Now we see fentanyl. And just looking at both as a professional in the area, as a parent and a housing provider, we want to make it easier for people to get help. Any questions? And thank you.
Thank you so much. Do any of the committee members have any questions for our presenter? Okay, thank you so much.